quite came out of teaching about Gandhi at Duke, being very inspired by this titanic personality that I think neither India nor the world can ignore, particularly his relevance to our public life and our private lives today. But also in the context of a program I led in which I took 6 Duke students to India for a whole year. They studied India, and a large chunk of that study was studying Gandhi, both in context, both within the classroom as also traveling and doing civic work. So some of these remarks come out of that experience. I'd like to just share with you a few thoughts about, I think, what has largely been eclipsed from Indian public life, political public life, and that is, those are the ashrams. What were Gandhi's ashrams about? What did they achieve? What did they seek to accomplish? What is the relevance of the ashram life for us today? What's really interesting about Gandhi's setting up of ashrams, and I'll tell you a little bit about that story also, is that they were never envisaged as retirement homes. They were never envisaged as places where one could put aside the important work to do something else. These were places of self-preparation, particularly for an ethical political life, something that we are crying out for today. So between the years, and I won't get into Gandhi's history, familiar to all of you here. Between the years that he spent in South Africa, he arrived in South Africa in Durban in 1893, and he was there till about 1914, after which he comes back to India. And those years in South Africa were seminal in his own self-formation and his own experimentation, which certainly he outlines in great candid detail in that autobiography. So I wanted to start out by quickly saying that when he was in South Africa, amidst all the turbulence of what it meant to be brown and black in South Africa, he was coming to understand not only just racial politics of the place, but how to come up with solutions and interventions in the turbulence that was taking place then. So he sets up these 2 ashrams, and I'm just going to zoom into the ashram experience and why I think that is so compelling for us today also. If you can just go back to that map. So he sets up the first ashram that he sets up. And he doesn't call it an ashram at that point, it's just called the Phoenix Settlement. Sets it up in Durham, so in Durban, that first arrow. And then the second, and then that is in 1904. Sets up the Phoenix Settlement. And this is because he has spent just about enough time in South Africa where he begins to feel that unless you create a space in which you can experiment with what it means to be a self-sufficient community, and create networks from within the community, and we're here gathered as a community also, you cannot derive any sort of political traction. And so he was doing a lot of work. And so this is, the Phoenix settlement has since become transformed into other kinds of things. But so that was the very first settlement, and it was called a settlement, it wasn't called an ashram. So he builds this, this is of course a reconstruction obviously of 1904. And then, let's go to the next image. There were many things that were happening in this Phoenix settlement, and one of them was the printing press. It was not lost on Gandhi ever in his entire career that media, print media, and he used print technology brilliantly, was absolutely essential to create a civic sense and an awareness of inequalities. And
one of the experiences that resonated most with me when we went to Sevagram last year was the meal that they so warmly shared with us. Not only because it really demonstrated an immense hospitality, but because I felt that it truly made me feel the lived practices of Gandhi's ethics and the ethics of the entire ashram. When we sat down to eat, there was really no sense of any kind of social hierarchy or status that mattered. The food was simple, but extremely, very delicious and nourishing. And after we ate, we individually took our plates and washed them, and helped with finishing the food and just wrapping up everything as a group. So guests and hosts worked alike. We also met several students that had come, I think 3 students that had come from the US and also from Europe that had come to stay in the ashram, and they worked through preparing the food and through gardening and cooking and it was a really interesting gateway to see a very relatable person kind of living bringing to life a lot of the ideas that Gandhi had and the ways that the ashram was still being very much dynamic and living out his ethics.
That happened at the end of every day at Gandhi's ashram. And I think as a college student, we spend a lot of time in a classroom, and it's one thing to read Gandhi's autobiography, but then it's something else to actually see it happen in person. And the biggest thing that resonated with me is the stark simplicity. We helped the residents lay out the mats for the prayer at the end of the day, 2 on the left, 2 on the right, and then 4 in the middle. And throughout the entire prayer, I think the thing I observed the most was people's dedication and consciousness to the prayer. And everything was done with pride. It didn't matter if the prayer was in Hindi, Arabic, or Urdu. Everything was taken the same. And there was
for migrant children that wasn't a school but was made to be a school. And one of the things that I took away from that was that the way in which these students were able to read Gandhi's autobiography, not think of him as a legend, as an icon, which most of us do think of him, but to take from that autobiography the basics of what it takes to be an ethical leader. So they constructed, for instance, for these children they came up with, these two were actually involved in coming up with a product like a mobile curriculum that would help these migrant kids as they move from site to site, wherever construction goes. Another group came up with a system for partnerships. And a third group documented the life stories of these construction workers so that you get the human face of this. So there are ways in which that autobiography actually works in our modern context in unprecedented ways. This I think would be a manual for leadership. So I just want to end with a note that Gandhi's relevance is even more pressing than it has ever been. And I'm happy to have shared these thoughts with you. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Prasad said that Gandhi's message was, let us seize. So I am seizing the moment to present this bouquet and this Gandhian rosary to Dr. Leela Prasad. Thank you very much for coming over and giving us this.